Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. George Lucas is known for pushing special effects and the visual arts to their limits with the creation of the Star Wars franchise. But what he gets far less credit for are the values and lessons that he imparts to his audiences through carefully crafted themes that permeate all throughout the series and the characters. I think as a creator, he always made sure that his content has a positive effect on the audience, which I think is the highest calling for an artist. Far more, impressive than the awards and accolades one accepts from their peers. George Lucas has considerable empathy and compassion as seen in his work and stories, and I truly believe he cares about the audience, but in a pretty unique way. He's not seeking our approval. Instead, what he wants is for the audience to develop, to grow from watching his content. The massive body of work he is responsible for is not just entertainment, but a template and a guide that imparts wisdom to the audience so that we don't get lost in this increasingly complex world. And perhaps most importantly, George Lucas respects the audience, or at least he trusts the audience to understand him, and that is not something we see from large Hollywood productions. George Lucas is the definition of courage when it comes to creating cinema, and so while the prequels were derided by critics and fans, he took the responsibility for the flaws of that series, the reputational damage, in order to see his message through, a message that most fans didn't quite understand or appreciate until they themselves grew up and saw what Lucas saw. And this in turn, I think, is the X factor that makes this franchise so beloved and popular. Before we continue, a quick word from our sponsor for today's video, UPDF. Have you guys ever juggled a PDF across, multiple platforms, a phone, a tablet, a laptop? Well, UPDF is one of the cleanest workflows I've run across. One account works across Mac, Windows, iPad, and Android with the same interface everywhere. You can edit text and images, directly rearrange pages, convert PDFs, and use OCR to turn scanned documents into files that you can edit. What really stands out though is UPDF's AI. I can summarize a document, ask questions inside the PDF, and translate it or pull key points instantly. The best part is UPDF is less than a quarter the price of Adobe, and it works on up to 4 devices and has a 30-day money-back guarantee. Click on the link down below if you want to try UPDF for free or take advantage of our exclusive discount just for our viewers. Well, thank you for your patience. On to the rest of the video. If we take a look at Lucas's background, his first love in life was probably racing cars, and then he found filmmaking shortly after, like a gruesome injury almost took his life. But the other thing he studied in college that he really loved was actually anthropology, or the study of human society and how humans interact with one another. To be curious about this means you're curious in what makes the world tick and why humans are able to create civilizations and culture. But to study anthropology transcends just mere curiosity. It indicates a cognitive style that embraces the messiness and diversity of humanity and trying to explain human behavior in a more systematic and predictable way. Which kind of makes sense if you consider that George Lucas was like a gearhead. I mean, he tooled around with hot rods when he was a younger man. He was very, very good with mechanical things, kind of like Anakin was as a young man, or Luke as a young man. But George wasn't always a powerful movie mogul. And as a young man, he was a soft-spoken, introverted individual. He wasn't the popular kid in school. He was shy and kept to himself. He had his own group of friends with shared interests, of course. And I think his drift towards anthropology was a way for him, again, to make sense of the world, to kind of create a framework so he can better understand how to interact with people. This natural curiosity for humanity drew him towards many different cultures and belief systems, elements he later remixed into the larger world and themes of Star Wars. George also grew up in the counterculture of the 1960s. He was highly distrustful of authoritarian institutions. And as an artist, he actually disliked the intellectual elite who were more concerned, again, about accolades, about experimenting with the forms and winning praise and I guess, status from his peers. What he wanted to do was to create myths that the ordinary person could live by and enjoy. In this way, he was very much a rebel in film school. His quiet observations of the world around him and study of humanity, one very close brush with death at a young age due to a car accident, allowed him to have wisdom way beyond his years and experience. But Lucas wasn't always the most comfortable orator, and if you take a look at his films, dialogue whether it's writing the dialogue or directing it, has always been one of his biggest weaknesses. This is why George Lucas has always been a visual communicator. He is able to display emotion in a very masterful way using film as a medium. From the sterile pressure and stress that permeates every scene in THX 1138 to the twin suns at Tatooine. It was with film that George Lucas found his voice and a medium for telling the stories he wanted the world to hear. Now let's take a look at the themes in George Lucas's two trilogies. The first original trilogy deals with myths and the unconquerable human spirit, whereas the second trilogy is more geopolitical, an analysis of why stable, wealthy, democratic societies inflict self-wounds and destroy themselves. These are not decisions made by a businessman trying to cash in on a new trend. This is not a performative, virtue signaling piece of work made by a person who is relatively empty. I mean, George Lucas is clearly passionate about these issues, and you can tell on screen right away. Me and Congo had to sit through Avatar recently and watch evil space whalers killing peaceful alien whales, and I couldn't. Now let's talk about James Cameron, because I think it's a good way to frame what makes George Lucas so unique and different, right? Many have described James Cameron as a protege or a second coming of George Lucas. Both are known for pushing the technical limits of cinema. The story in Avatar might be lackluster, but the world itself, the visuals, are beautiful. But what separates Cameron from George Lucas is I think George Lucas has a much deeper understanding and appreciation for the human experience. I don't think George would ever say that about James Cameron, because I think he appreciates his work and likes what he does. This is me, kind of talking out of my ass here. But yeah, Jake Sully, the main character in Avatar, seems like a remarkable character. I mean, he falls in love with the Na'vi, ends up joining them. His avatar even frees him from his very real physical limitations as a paralyzed human. But Jake Sully is ultimately an uninteresting character. He is a vehicle that takes us through the wonderful worlds of Pandora, and as such, he is predictable. He doesn't run around slaughtering Jedi younglings like George Lucas's protagonist. And so from the first moment we see Jake Sully moaning about how Super Earth isn't cool anymore and how, horrible corporations are, we know that he is a species traitor, and that he's going to turn against his own people, including the caring Colonel Miles Quaritch, who, let's be honest, is just trying to save humanity from extinction. There's no drama, there's no suspense, it's just a technical marvel, an amazing 3D film that is a feast for the eyes. The story itself is just a rehash of Dancing with the Wolves or Last Samurai or Ferngully. In James Cameron's world, the good guys and the bad guys are all caricatures. An over-the-top representation of the real thing that ultimately cheapens the very values that James Cameron is trying to portray on screen. And I gotta say, I have the same values as James Cameron does. I believe in a lot of the same things that he obviously believes in. And I also like James Cameron's everyman background. The guy used to be a trucker, and as a highly successful millionaire, he spent his money doing cool shit, like exploring the depths of the ocean and not just buying meaningless expressions of wealth. It's just that I was supposed to see No Other Choice by Park Chan-wook the other day with Congo, but it was sold out, and so I ended up seeing Avatar Fire and Ashes, and bro, this movie was 3 hours and 17 minutes long. I have still not recovered from this. I am pissed. I gotta let that go. Anyway, George Lucas has always talked publicly about being influenced by Joseph Campbell's The Hero with 1,000 Faces. And this book's central theme is that all throughout history, across cultures, religions, eras, human societies seem to tell the same story about transformation over and over again. This is the story known as the hero's journey. And Campbell basically believes that these myths aren't just random stories that somehow coincidentally keep popping up all throughout history. Instead, he believes that these are psychological maps that shows how human society has evolved and transformed, but faces the same challenges time and time again. And these myths are designed to help navigate the fear and loss we face in life's journey, and at the same time instill us with a sense of responsibility and meaning as we progress through life, so that we can all one day become contributors and positive members of society who return the shopping carts back to the corrals, guys. And so these myths are not just mere stories that are designed to entertain. They are, in many ways, lessons steeped in great wisdom, passed down through the generations after much trial and error. I've had this long-held belief that when a group of people pass down stories and wisdom to each generation, it's not just culture. I call it cultural technology, because there is real value. There is real kind of progression and evolution of thoughts. And these beliefs, these cultural values are really designed to protect people and to make sure that society is stable. In this way, cultural technology is almost invaluable. And oftentimes it gets destroyed and people suffer the consequences. I mean, take a look at religions here on earth and how much meaning they can have to people. In Islam, we have the holy month of Ramadan, where the devout cannot eat or drink for 30 days during the daytime. Being hungry is not something you experience in the modern world, especially in Western countries. And so putting yourself in that kind of more vulnerable state opens your mind to a lot of things. It helps you have a new appreciation for food, for people who might not have food. And, a little suffering can really shape you and give you character. It can also probably clean your gut out a little bit, which is nice. The Jews have Shabbat. Every Friday night at sundown till Saturday sundown, Jewish families put work aside. They turn off their phones. They drink a little wine. They talk with their family, discuss the world, about what they're going through. Jews force themselves to take it easy every weekend so they do not burn out. And there is so much wisdom in that. The Christians have the Sabbath, which occurs on Sunday. And in spirit, it focuses on the very same thing. Do not overwork your people. Give people some time for rest. And when Christianity was spread all across the Roman Empire, something even more interesting happened. It institutionalized the idea that the weekend is for breaks. And that is something to this day we all get to enjoy. These were lessons not learned by one person, but were the result of the shared experience of many generations. Social technology, it's so precious. And when that culture is destroyed, it has some very severe consequences that leaves populations defenseless against, pretty human flaws. I talk a lot about the Cultural Revolution on this channel and its lasting impacts on Chinese society, and at this point it's not even political for me. Instead, I oftentimes wonder what my own life would have looked like if I was born in a more traditional family with more cultural values. On one hand, I'd probably be less open-minded, and I probably would not have experienced the world in the same way and found the same successes because of that open-mindedness. But at the same time, even if I can really filter from one group to another, enjoy, appreciate, and understand different cultures, I do typically feel like a tourist. I don't really belong anywhere specifically. Now, George Lucas rarely talks about his own religious beliefs and cultural upbringing, but he's joked before that he considers himself a Methodist Buddhist, which is actually a pretty good description of who he is, I think. And, George was born in a Methodist home, and there are definitely a lot of values he learned from that upbringing that we see in Star Wars. Methodists tend to focus on disciplined practice and gradual transformation of the self and lived holiness. And that makes them, in some ways, interestingly enough, psychologically closer to Eastern spiritual traditions than many belief-centered forms of Christianity. A Methodist Buddhist is not a real, religion. Pretty sure it's not, but in many ways, it does describe what the Jedi Order is, right? An organization rooted in spiritual discipline and also a more Buddhist detachment from one's emotions. A lot of Star Wars is actually like this, a direct reflection of George Lucas's own beliefs, passions, and flaws and moral values. When creating Star Wars, George Lucas noticed that modern society and media was interrupting the passing down of myths to the next generation. Community versus ego, responsibility versus selfishness, sacrifice over short-term gain. These are ideas that are the glue that keeps society together. As religion retreated in the world, as both parents entered the workplace, kids were placed in a more and more vulnerable situation, and they were far more confused than ever before. Lucas sensed that the children of his time were facing real crisis, and this is who he made Star Wars for. He said this on multiple occasions. But Lucas was smart and also ethical. He didn't want to create sermons and replicate the fire and brimstone message of pastors or the institution of religion. He didn't want to replicate the certainty that holy men prescribe over their own faith. He didn't want to tell children what to think. Instead, he wanted to give them a moral compass, so that they can begin to think morally for themselves. This is why the Jedi are not completely good. They have moral failings when they blindly just follow institutions instead of their own hearts, like Luke did, like Qui-Gon Jinn did. But at the same time, if you follow your heart too much and let your emotions consume you, you become Anakin. But at the same time, even someone like Anakin, who has done so much evil as he has, is given a chance at redemption in Star Wars, and that is very important in my opinion. George Lucas has a deep empathy and compassion for the human experience. He doesn't perceive humans as naturally evil. He believes that evil instead is a side product of fear. I mean, that's the entire Jedi code, right? Fear leads to anger, and that leads to hatred, and that leads to bad things. That is why we get characters like Anakin Skywalker. That is why the Jedi Code identifies fear as the foundation of what goes wrong in the galaxy. The heroes of Lucas's story, the Jedi, are so powerful that when they confront criminals or enemies, they are explicitly taught never to act from fear. Fear clouds judgment and narrows perception. Without clarity of mind, immense power can produce horrific outcomes, and that is when a Jedi falls to the dark side, right? The Jedi ideal is not domination, but restraint, understanding the situation fully so that violence can be avoided and outcomes can be de-escalated whenever possible. This reflects the mindset of a deeply rational thinker who, in a very idealistic way, believes that all humans can find clarity of mind by stepping outside of their emotions, by abandoning fear. And I think that is such a wonderful message, especially in today's environment when there's nothing but fear everywhere we look. The average person, when confronted with something abhorrent like racism, often reacts instinctively. They attack, they shame, they destroy. But in Lucas's worldview, a racist is not a monster by nature, but a person consumed by fear and anger, both of which clouds judgment and gives rise to destructive beliefs. Like a physician diagnosing an illness, Lucas is not interested in just treating the symptoms. He wants to get to the root cause of the illness, right? These are profound and complex lessons to teach children. And the fall of Anakin Skywalker and the redemption of Darth Vader are emotionally shocking moments, one that most writers would avoid unless they are passionate about the message and story they're trying to tell. And so George Lucas embraces these moments because he understands that children don't learn through intellect, they learn through emotional connection to things. They learn by having empathy for the characters on screen, by relating to the characters they see, by embedding these very strong moral ideas inside of a sweeping space adventure. Lucas creates the perfect vehicle to quietly transmit moral insight, lessons about fear, responsibility, and redemption without ever turning them into a lecture. And that is something that most people cannot do. And the effects of these movies are everywhere. I mean, I think half of the world has seen these movies. Most of the world leaders that are running countries today have seen Star Wars. Get that fact through your head. I mean, a lot of them probably have not gotten the right messages from Star Wars or have forgotten the moral values imparted by it, but yeah, I'm sure most people have seen them. And honestly, when I meet Star Wars fans in person, and I do, like occasionally when I'm walking on the street, someone will come up to me and say hi, and it's always like lovely people, like nice, kind. A lot of them seem ideological and not cynical about the world, which I think is a beautiful thing. We tend to have this belief that like Star Wars fans are like negative and angry and they say toxic things, but the truth is that's like a small, tiny, minor portion of the community. And yeah, social media algorithms, they take their comments and they blow them up, and this is a huge problem because I think it shifts our perception of what's actually happening out there. I mean, look at the 501st Legion. Almost half a century after the first Star Wars movie was made. It's a group of Star Wars enthusiasts who create uniforms so real that they often are hired as extras in Star Wars productions. But the real value they bring to the world is their charitable contributions. You know, like these people, they perform in hospitals, they entertain sick kids, they raise money for causes. Bad guys doing good things, right? And so, yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that I think keeps me coming back to Star Wars, right? When I was young, it was the world building, it was the cool fights and all the giant tanks and walkers and starships. But now as I get older, as I have a family of my own, as I have a young daughter, and I reflect on like what I've done in my life and the content I'm making, I'm starting to realize that, wow, Star Wars is an incredible platform for like discussing a lot of issues without just being very blunt and in people's faces. It's a great way to discuss uncomfortable issues that people normally aren't interested in or just, don't want to talk about. And I've noticed a lot of the creators, a lot of the artists who come to Star Wars, yes, some of them are just hacks and they don't make good content, but a lot of them also have a very similar vibe to George Lucas. They want to spread meaning in their work. I mean, this is why I love Andor so much. I think Tony Gilroy, in a lot of ways, he's completely different from George Lucas, but he makes content in that same spirit. And I think that is why I continue to really love this franchise. The world can be a very dark place. The internet can be a very dark place. But Star Wars is just like far away from all that, far enough away from all that it can provide us with some solace and some courage. Yeah. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.